Telling you, man, we talk about this all the time. It's got to be story first. So today we're talking storytelling, the elusive, the term that has turned social media upside down. The just it's everywhere and it's nowhere at the same time. Storytelling. My hopes is to be able to have you guys leave with a little bit of clarity, maybe some steps, maybe some insight on where we view storytelling, steps you can take, and maybe just insight on how you can implement that into what it is that you do, because it is a foundation of video production. It's a foundation of really being able to serve your client well. And so today we have with us Mr. Kemp Lyons with Ember Scout. I'm so excited to have you here, Kemp. How are you doing?
I am living the dream.
Hey, nice.
Wait, hold on. Let me smile. I'm living the dream. That makes
Right,
it's more
there you
believable
go.
that way, right?
Right, there you go. Nice, man. So Kemp is the executive producer for Ember Scout. He has a ton of history, a ton of background in just education, from teaching in universities, adjunct, being a director at other universities. I mean, he's done a good bit of work. So I'm excited to hear his perspective in both kind of like the educational side of it, as well as like, I don't say in the streets, but the business side of storytelling and that kind of a thing. And so I want to kind of give you the floor for a second, Kemp. If you could kind of bring us up to where you are today, maybe share a quick, like 45-second story in regards to where you started in regards to video production and storytelling to where you landed here now with Ember Scout. Just kind of calibrate everyone real quick.
Yeah, I mean, the short version is I never wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to
Mm.
be a video game designer. But the reason was that I thought interactive stories are one of the most powerful medium, right? Like story
Wow.
is so effective for human communication and meaning making. Apply an
Right.
interactive layer, an agentic layer on top of
Right.
that, and it's even
Yes.
more powerful. So I was really excited about that. But long story short, that didn't work out. And while I was working at a film school, running all the equipment in the edit lab and stuff like that, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I wasting my time chasing something that's not working when I could tell stories right here, right now with the resources available to me? So
Gotcha.
started pursuing filmmaking from there, got my first freelance client a week later. Um, Bopped around a couple different jobs in higher ed, went to agency world just for a minute. And then now for 5-ish years, I've been independent, either just on my own name or with Ember Scout, making commercial corporate videos for clients.
Gotcha. So what did that feel like going from, I guess, what you were doing before this to that? It sounds like there was kind of a mental, or I guess a realization of I'm doing this, but I recognize that I'm really actually wanting to pursue this. Like, was that a
Yeah,
flip
I'd say
or
it's more like a maturing thing, right? Like we all
okay?
have that thing that we want when we're kids.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to give that up. And especially in our culture, which we hear like hustle, grind, don't give up, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I think part of growing up is realizing that you can't do things in a vacuum, or at least if
Mm,
you aren't so far doing it in a vacuum, maybe you can't going forward. And looking
yeah.
around, seeing what assets, what resources you have available to you that are not maybe that thing that you wanted, but also still can scratch that itch. That's what filmmaking was for me. And I think it's so funny, so many people, this is their plan A, not their plan B, but for me, this is my plan B, was to be a filmmaker. And again, I wouldn't say that I don't know, it's taken me years to accept the label of filmmaker.
Right.
Um, but because that was not necessarily my intention. I think I sit really clearly in sort of like the marketing value chain and
Yeah.
kind of like it.
Mm,
And that, speaking of passions, like that's enabled me to dabble in other areas that being a game designer never would have. So I'm really grateful that, you just sort of wake up one Thanksgiving break and you're like, well, I should quit the thing that I've been trying and do
mm,
this instead.
wow.
And it's worked out great.
Yeah, man. That's very inspirational. Like for those, I know that that can sound.
Failure is inspirational,
I
kids. Don't forget, you give up your dreams.
I know that sounds corny,
No,
but
no, no. I think there's real value in it for sure.
well, I mean, you're in the mix, man. So in the midst of everything social media happening, where
Mhm.
everybody is creating and producing everything all the time, it's very difficult to say, you know what, I hear everything that's going on, but this is where I want to put my eggs in the basket, and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard because there's FOMO everywhere. There's just everybody's doing everything, man. So to be able to say, hey, I understand this is what I'm doing, but I actually see the desire I have for this, that takes some It takes some gall to be
Yeah, we
able to.
can talk more about that later, maybe,
Yeah,
because I think the future of the industry is probably within that creator social space, right? That's actually something that I'm wrestling with right now as a business, is saying,
I agree.
I I mean, even though this is my B career, right? I came up in a world of thriving online video, and I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm beginning to suspect that thriving online video now is creator led, and it's
Mm,
much less brand led. It's much less what we think of as corporate and commercial video production.
yeah,
Um, and so that's something that we can talk about for the future of the industry and what the future of storytelling looks like. But
yeah,
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the social media thing.
yeah, yeah. Well, hey, like I said, feel free to share as we go. There,
Yeah.
open form a little bit. Cool. So let's kind of dive in a little bit. Storytelling. For you guys, for you Kemp, for Ember
Hmm.
Scout, how do you guys tend to define storytelling when it comes to your craft and what you guys do?
Yeah, definition of storytelling feels very elusive, right? I think
I
you
know.
alluded to it in your introduction. That
Yeah.
story, I'd say, especially in like 2012 to 2018, that
Mm-hmm.
was such a buzzword for the marketing world.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is story, 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 story. And I
Yeah.
think it's actually diminished a little bit. I don't think people are as focused on storytelling as storytelling. And even
Mm-hmm.
then, I think the word was a little bit misused. But right now, I'd say when we think of story, we think of, the honestly a relatively traditional definition: characters undergoing change through a plot, right? So through a series of escalating circumstances, some sort of toward some sort of catharsis ending. So at a minimum, a story's got characters, it's got a beginning, middle, and end, and it's got some kind of change.
Right.
How we do that, I think, really depends on the context of what we're trying to do. But I am not one that's going to come and try to rock the boat and be like, story is any kind of communication. No,
Yeah.
story has characters. Story has conflict. Story has a beginning, middle, and end. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great summary. I think for us with film story, it's a similar understanding. I think what I tried to do before even when we're first listening and hearing from the client or hearing from the brand or whoever we're speaking with,
Mm-hmm.
it's just being able to identify, okay, what's the actual transformation that's happening with this
Yeah.
business? What is it that they're here, they're trying to get here, why, like, what is it? And
Mm-hmm.
initially that's where the videos tend to start for me. And for some reason with me, maybe it's because I initially wanted to go into, believe this or not, music production. Back when I was in my undergrad, I wanted to be
Yeah.
like the next like Timbaland, like just making music or whatever. Did that for a little bit. It was horrible. I wasn't a fan. But when I think about that little beginning to end and how that happens, why that's happening, and I tend to think musically first,
Hmm.
and it adds context to the vision that is the story. And I think being able to kind of identify and build those muscles and being able to hear from your client, really listen, identifying what their struggle is and identifying how they're the solution to that is,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the foundation for what we do and how we do what it is that we do, which is why things regarding camera gear and production come so far later on. Like by that time, I know the client's family, like I know their history, I know where they went to high school. Like there's
Yeah.
we've invested a good bit of time into it, so I definitely understand that
Well, the
perspective.
tools are the tools, right? Like the tools have never been easier to use, or frankly, like
Yeah, true.
what do you call it? Uniform, right? Like you can
Yeah.
make something excellent with almost anything now.
Yeah.
And that was kind of always the
True.
case if you knew what you were doing. But
Mm-hmm.
like, there's just not that big of a difference
Yeah.
in, um, I mean, really, from your phone to an Alexa camera,
Yeah.
right? Like, yes, of course there is, right? Yes, of course. But when we're talking about storytelling, like, hey, or it still uses an exposure triangle. It's still, you know what I mean? Like, there's still a record button. There's still codecs and formats that you have to think through and
Yeah.
whatever. But like, every camera can do those things in slightly different ways. So it's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like the tools are it kind of just whatever. And they're fun to talk about, right? Like
Right.
I also have gear acquisition syndrome. I also get excited about the new C80 has me like drooling.
Your acquisition syndrome. I've
But
never heard of that before.
oh, you haven't really? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I've got it bad. I have pretty good discipline about it, but I've got it bad.
Yeah.
I really want new things, but
Mm,
that comes secondary, right?
yeah.
The tools are just a means by which we tell the story, and so
Yeah.
super fun to talk about, super fun to dream about. But at the end of the day, we can make things on an iPhone, right? And people are, right? People
Yeah.
are making really compelling content on iPhones just fine. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think so. Sorry, call. So I think taking a step deeper, when we think
Hmm.
of storytelling, there's normally, I like to classify it as like kind of layers to it. There's the story,
Hmm.
whether it's like dialogue or trying to get that story told via somebody speaking or whatever that is. But then there's also being able to portray that into the video, into whatever you're
Hmm.
creating. So I think of like they have dialogue, but there's also like the way in which you film something.
Yep.
There's the way in which you add, audio or sound effects or
Yeah.
music.
Yep.
There's,
All those
you know,
cinematic tools. Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I did slash do, but more so did weddings for a long time was
Mm.
because weddings are a very tangible way to practice storytelling.
Yes.
Every
Yes.
wedding is beautiful. They're amazing. The
Hmm.
venue's amazing. It's breathtaking. But a lot of them are the same.
Yeah.
And not to take that from anybody, but when you're able
Not
to
your wedding, not whoever's listening to
yeah,
this. Like,
no,
not
no, not your
your
wedding.
wedding was
Not
very
your wedding.
special.
Not yeah. Yours is one of a kind. There's none
Yeah.
out like
Never
out there.
the best wedding,
Never
really.
yeah,
Whoever you
there's
are listening. Yeah.
it's out of this world, right? But being able to practice that
Yeah.
and to think about that before you even press record, that
Hmm.
is a skill that has to be practiced.
Yeah.
And you don't just show up and just say, all right, we'll just see what happens. Like it takes a little bit of pre-thought to be able to think that
Hmm.
through. So for you guys with
Yeah.
storytelling and Ember Scout and creating these projects, if you haven't, guys, check out their website, Ember Scout. The content they have in there is really cool. Like the kind of samples they have there, the work that they did, the seamlessness with their story for the most what makes it seem like the simplest things. I think as a key indicator of great storytelling. A lot of times you can tell, films or anything that have to me aren't as great when they try to say or share everything right in front of you and it
Mm.
has tons of dialogue and just tons of it and there's no room for imagination or there's no room for
Yeah.
you to kind of conclude things your own, but for them
Hmm.
really solid content. So for you guys, when you're going through that process, maybe what was it like? I'm gonna take a step back because I'm getting ahead of myself. What was it like for you guys when you defined storytelling when you first started out? Like, what did you think of? What did you do? How did you do it?
Yeah, that's a
And
good
compare
question.
that to what it is now. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious.
No, that's a really good question because it has changed, I think, pretty significantly. So
Yeah.
I graduated film school in 2009.
Okay.
And this is right as the 5D was coming and like changing everything
Oh
about
yeah.
video capture. And so my program from 2005 to 2009 was really about specializing in a craft, a part
Okay.
of filmmaking. And so in school, I was producing, and everything that we did in school was narrative. And so learning
Mhm.
some specifics around producing narrative films. And then
Okay.
screenwriting. I did a good bit of screenwriting in college as well. Like every night doing my pages, have a couple features under my belt, a bunch of shorts, blah, blah, blah. And
Okay.
so, especially graduating into the film world of 2009, the early 2010s, where no longer was a producer a thing that someone wanted, at least not in like Midwestern markets. They wanted a videographer, right? They wanted someone who could handle everything.
Okay.
And so I was skillless, but really leaned heavily on my screenwriting experience. And so I saw things really much more narratively. And so
Okay.
when I got my first job as a single,
Sorry, let me pause you there.
go ahead.
Did you feel like you were at a disadvantage because you were only like you were more so focused on that side rather
Yeah.
than on the on-site production
Hmm.
kind of thing? Okay.
Yeah, because narrative is just a different beast, right?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you're right, like when you're telling a story that really is based on characters and drama, and production design is so important, and casting is so important, like all these things that like are also important in corporate and commercial work, obviously, but
Yeah.
just not at the entry level scale, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to move to Hollywood to use that skill set, right? That was the only place I could go, was Hollywood.
Hmm.
Now, that just wasn't in the cards for me for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And so when I got my first job, when I was like the solo video guy doing everything, I did feel like, well, how do I even tell a story properly? Like
Right.
without, like you talked about, like characters and dialogue and setup and all these things that are like part of a 3 act structure. How do I do that in 3 minutes or less? And how
Right.
do I do that with just this person? I worked at a university, the student in the middle of their program. I have no idea how to do this. And so started casting around for like resources online. One tool that was really helpful for me then that I continue to use now is this. They call it, what are they called now? The science of storytelling, I think they call themselves now. They
Hmm.
were called Muse back then.
Yeah. Oh, well, sorry. No, I know of a Muse storytelling now, but not back then.
Yeah, I think it's probably the same folks. The science of
Okay.
storytelling, maybe that's one of their classes. They've done some rebranding. This is over 10 years ago now. So,
Okay.
um, but I found their resources really helpful for simplifying my knowledge of story that was based in, writer's journey, Save the Cat, Robert McKee kind of stuff,
Hmm.
and distilling that down into something simpler. I still have, I don't know if it's going to rack focus, but like, oh nope, I still have Robert McKee's book back there, right? Because that is still probably the second most powerful book I've ever read. Um, but it's really hard to apply those principles in 3 minutes or less.
Mm-hmm.
And so using some of those Muse principles was really helpful to sort of pull things in deeper, to the actual work that I was doing,
Yeah.
that I was being asked to do at that time.
Okay.
And then since then, yeah, we've got a variety of tools and frameworks that we sort of like on a per project basis bolt on to understand what the client needs or what the project needs or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So that when that transitioning was happening, that was right after you finished school, or that was during
It was a
slash.
few years later. So I was
Okay.
transitioning from, you know, pursuing video games, whatever that looked like, into being, trying to pursue filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
And really, like the best I had at that moment was, my schoolwork, right? That was the most experience I'd had in storytelling, was just what I did in school. So it
Yeah.
was very much like, okay, how do I professionalize this? How do
Yeah.
I refine what I think I'm still good at, but refine it through a lens and a framework that's more applicable to short form content
Hmm.
or to the marketing funnel more generally?
Yeah. Okay. So with where you are now, do you like, in my head, I see that as a plus,
Mm.
that you kind of started off on what a lot of videographers tend to deem, no, I'm not doing that. I just want to film, or I just want to, hold the camera kind of a thing. But now with the mentality you have, you've built Ember Scout to do
Hmm.
just that, like to have your aspect of it, but to bring on the right people to kind of help,
That's right.
exactly what you're doing.
And I'd say most of the people I've met in this industry, I mean, they do want to be storytellers, right? They got into this to be storytellers, and maybe they have a passion for a particular tool like sound or cinematography or production design or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Hmm.
that's why they're here ultimately, is to be a good storyteller. And the people that we tend to work with on our high level stuff, right? Because I think we can talk about that if you want to, but like there's a range of work that we do, and when we work on our highest level stuff, like my cinematographers are asking me like, what's the story? What's the scene about? What is the transformation in this moment? How do we capture that
Right.
the best using their skill set, their imagination to augment that fully? And
Right.
obviously, we're still like controlling, directing, producing, whatever, like the big picture stuff. But
Hmm.
I try to bring on people who really do care about that, who understand that this isn't just holding a camera, right? That every motion has meaning, and
Right.
people who know how to use that tool really well.
Attention, small businesses. The time for getting left behind when it comes to creating your social media video content is now over. And you don't have to be a maestro with an expensive camera to have a great social media presence either. In fact, what if I told you that in order to grow your brand and to position yourself as a leader online, all you would need is a smartphone and a laptop with internet connection in order to create quick and relevant and consistent video content that has no choice but to attract and bring in your intended audience. If you're a small business owner like me, You're probably filling many hats and barely have any time to think about social media, let alone creating consistent video content for your business, because it's always a stressful process that leaves you even more discouraged than when you were before you even started. Trust me, you are not alone. And this is why we're talking about immediate implementation into your social media platform and not something where you have to watch 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of video content. I've spent the last 10 years as a videographer serving both small and large organizations to help them with creating quality content that will attract their intended audience. And what's one thing that I've learned? Social media can be the equalizer. So if you're finished with FOMO and you're ready to streamline the video creation process, click the link below and I'll see you there. Right. Yeah, and I think that kind of goes to the next thought of how have we seen the process of storytelling change from, I mean, you mentioned
Yeah.
2012 to 2018.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe slightly before that to now,
Yeah.
because for us, you know, we've gone from when I first started post undergrad, so that's 2013. Um, I was specifically focused on the interview. Like,
Yeah.
I need to nail this interview. I need to
Yep.
think preemptively, get the great questions, try to get the heartfelt response. Depending on the project, try to get a tear. You know, like really trying
Totally.
to get
Yeah.
that down.
Yeah.
And now, like you're saying, it's this all encompassing, beyond just the dialogue and information.
Mm.
How do we actually create something where it connects with our audience and
Yeah.
it's not something that takes an hour and a half to watch, you know? So
Yeah.
from your
Yeah.
perspective, like how have you seen that change, from your eyes?
Yeah. It's hard to say from like a global sense what's changed, because I my sense of
Right.
that has, so myopic, just limited to like what I've known, what I've
Yes,
seen.
absolutely.
But I'd say that I have changed because I used to think very maybe similar to what you're saying, is like, oh, it's all about this moment.
Right.
And I found that yes, it is,
Hmm.
sort of,
Hmm.
but I can't do my best work in that moment unless I do a lot more, right? Like you're talking about dialogue and camera motion and production design. Like to me, that's all at the top of the building, right?
Yeah.
That's nowhere near the foundation. Those are the tools that we use to um, express the story, but the story is built on much deeper foundations, especially when you're doing work for a commercial or corporate or brand kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, and so we really start our storytelling process with a really deep dive with our clients about strategy, like marketing strategy, about like, who is your audience? Where is this being distributed? What KPIs do we need to meet or exceed, right? Like, what are we actually trying to do
Right.
with this video?
And so
Um,
KPIs, what does that mean?
Thank you. Thank you. Key performance indicators.
Mhm.
Video is a tool in the marketing funnel, right? Video is a
What?
tool to
You
do
mean it's not like
something.
everything?
It's not, right? Like I sometimes, no, in fact I don't wish it wasn't, right? I actually really like working with clients. I like the restriction
That's awesome.
of being a participant in something more than just storytelling, right?
That's
Like
awesome.
storytelling is an altered good on its own. I deeply believe
Absolutely.
that. That is one of my deepest values, is like,
Mhm.
well, a well-told story is a self-evident good. But I don't want to make movies for Hollywood. That's their job, right? Like I do want to help people obtain business objectives. And so
Absolutely.
starting from like, what are those objectives? What are those numbers? What are those things? What are the goals beyond let's make a thing?
Absolutely.
Um, that's a key part of our story discovery process.
Mm, mhm.
Um, and then from there, we
Hang on,
go
I'm
deeper.
sorry, Kim, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, no.
For those in the back, I wanna, like, that's super key. Like, there was a part in my career where I didn't have that vision. Like,
Mm,
there was no recognition of you are much more beyond the the Canon 5D Mark II that you're holding in your hand, and the story is as well. And to
yeah,
be able to start before that and say, "Hey, before we press record, like, where are you guys at? Like, what are you guys trying to
yes,
pursue? What are the
yes,
things that actually makes this project a win for you guys? Like, let's start there first
yeah,
before we get into, all right, let's film, let's talk about your story, like, let's talk about who you are. Like, what is that?" And even just taking the time to do that changes and calibrates the rest of the project. Like that, there's not a going around it and then start. Like that is the start, right?
That's
And I
right.
think that's so tough, man. That's a great point that you made, and I just wanted to make sure that
Well, that's our real value, right?
yeah,
Like in the marketplace is we make business objectives happen.
yeah,
If we lose sight of that, we are not going to be able to position ourselves in a way that gets us more work.
yeah,
And so by starting with what is the thing that we're trying to do really, we humble ourselves and say like, okay, that vision's more important than mine. Everything we do is in service to that goal.
yep,
And ultimately it lays the foundation for more work when we can say like, oh, I help, my projects help them build their follower account from this to that, or we help this guy close $1 million deal because of the stories or the videos that we created. um, that's, to me, that's all of it, right?
yeah.
um, and is the reason why I keep trying to market and connect with smart marketers who know how to use videos, because
Mm,
like
mhm.
i I've made a lot of videos that just sit on websites and they don't do anything.
Mm.
And then is it the video's fault? I don't think so.
Yeah, facts.
Anyway,
The truth comes out. Oh
that's
man,
right. That's
that's
right.
that's that's tough. That's tough, but that is a great point, man. I think, and it's hard sometimes to take responsibility for that
Mm,
because it's like, well, we made it for the company. Like they need to
it's their job.
do that, right?
And that is right. But that's
And
something
it
that
is.
we're working on figuring out is like, how do we offer better strategy? How do we
Yeah,
offer better, that kind of stuff? Because
yeah,
if a tree falls in the woods, right? Does anyone hear
right.
it? Right.
Hmm.
If a video is never seen, what's it for?
Right.
The eyeballs matter more than the video itself, which is, I think, again, to what I was alluding to earlier, where the market is shifting. Quality is going down. Video quality has maybe never been worse, um, but performance is going up because
Like
the
how?
production value doesn't matter. It's how you get eyeballs. That's
Yeah,
what matters. Full stop. If you can't get eyeballs, there's no reason to make it.
yeah,
And so that's what I'm seeing. That's one of the big shifts in the market that I'm seeing now, is a shift towards that creator style, TikTok kind of stuff. Not to say there's not a place for more cinematic, but right now there's more demand for shot on your phone than there is for shot on your Alexa,
yeah.
unless you're like at the highest tiers of production.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
anyway, that's a little aside.
I mean, it's true, and like you're saying earlier, I think that's I think you mentioned that earlier as well. That's where we're heading.
Yeah,
Like that's, I mean, the new iPhone just came out not too long ago, and it's continuing to work on bridging that gap
if only they'd get rid of the
between
freaking
DSLR,
variable
iPhone.
frame rate. Ugh.
Yeah,
Maybe I
right.
could use an iPhone if you'd give me a steady frame rate, Apple. Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, but they're bridging the gap slowly
Yeah,
but surely, and people are using it and developing their own content. And like you're saying, it's not these huge sets of production. It's the person with the phone in a well lit window that's created a strategy to be able to create content
yeah,
consistently in their version of it, and be able
yeah.
to reach those that it needs to reach to target, like you're saying, their performance. So I agree. Now there is still a desire and a need for production.
There is.
There are the high end kind of things, but
Yep.
also companies that are really wanting those flagship promotional pieces that are
Yeah.
website standing, that really
Yep.
say this is who we are, and this is like, I don't think that's
That's
gone
right.
away either.
That's
So
right.
it's really a, I don't want to say it's a wild wild west, but it's definitely getting shaken up a good bit.
Something's shifting. 100%.
Yeah.
It is not the Wild West, but it might be the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, especially
Hmm.
the metaphor extends because of AI, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes I feel I did an experiment earlier this year where I felt very much like John Henry, where
Okay.
I had AI build me 10 clips off of an interview, kind of like this, like a podcast style thing.
Yeah.
And I could use two of them. Like two of them I thought were good enough.
Yeah.
That took me about an hour. And then about an hour and a half, I built 10 that I liked, right? So I was still faster. I was still better than the AI, but not much longer, right? So I
Yeah.
think I think we are very much in the industrial revolution when it comes to advertising, marketing. We're in the early stages of that, where there's a lot of disruption, a lot of uncertainty, and that means that our clients are more uncertain than ever as well. Which is, I
Hmm.
think, where falling back on some of these for lack of a better term, more eternal storytelling values does still make
Hmm.
some sense. But it's
Yep.
more important than ever that we understand the principle behind it versus the execution of it, right? It's more
Yeah.
important that we understand that a 3 act structure is really about setup, action, and payoff than about 15 pages, 30 pages, 15 pages, or whatever. Um,
Yep.
these things are good to have as rules of thumb, but the more we can understand about the psychology of storytelling,
Yep.
why it works instead of that it works, I think the more
Yep.
persuasive we can be with our clients. Because
Absolutely.
story continues to be valuable if we abstract it further and further, right? To
Yeah.
understand the why behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
I want to go through a little bit of an example of what it's like for you guys in
yeah,
developing that for someone. So let's kind of
yep,
pretend a little bit, if you want to take the lead on what the process would be like if you had an inquiry come in for whatever, if you want to give an example, and just again focusing on how you go about developing what a story could look like. This isn't to put you too much on the pressure, but I am curious just what that's like, and for our listeners as well, just
yeah.
kind
Happy
of what.
to. I think I can give some examples maybe along the way.
Cool.
Um, some of which I can't. Yeah, let me just get started
Yeah,
with
you
yeah.
don't. Yeah, no. Hey, easy.
So it starts with a strategy thing, right? We always start with
Sure.
strategy as far as audience, distribution, business purpose. Like, what's our real objective? And again, those key performance indicators. What are the numbers that we're trying to change?
Okay.
And
You
that's
said audience,
usually
business.
yeah, audience objective and distribution, because distribution really
Okay.
matters, right? Like, what's
Objective
their
of the content.
right,
Gotcha.
right.
Okay.
And distribution is one that was like I didn't used to think it mattered.
Mm,
And like we talked about earlier, like the eyeballs are kind of all that matters. And so knowing what the distribution strategy is, where it's going to go, what platforms or whatever, that
mhm.
gives us an indication of like what kind of story we can tell or what kinds of things we can get out of this.
So
Um,
less about format and more about how you would create.
yeah. I mean both, right? There's a technical. We have a page in our deck called where I say that filmmaking is both creative and technical, right? Like
Mhm.
both things are part of this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if we know that you're going on TikTok, that's going to mean certain things about what we shoot and how we shoot it. But it's
Yeah.
also going to mean certain things about what's the style of the video, right? Like
Mm.
it's probably going to look a little bit more TikToky, right? A little bit more creator led, a little bit more low production value.
Right.
If we know it's going to go on your website, that means something different. I'm working on a project right now that, for lack of a, that is going to have a captive audience, right? And so I don't have to make the beginning as hooky as I normally might. I can let it sit. I can let the story build,
Right.
which when we're talking in a world of online stuff, I can't.
Right.
And so that distribution thing is a really key piece to understand. You know your technical limitations and then your creative options. I think.
Yeah.
Um, but after that conversation, sometimes that's in like early discovery, like first conversation. Sometimes it's after sale. We have
Yeah.
more of that conversation because maybe there's some more or less leadership for us to do in that area.
Mhm.
Um, but eventually we start developing a creative treatment, just like a lot of places, right? We'll put a treatment together for the video, and that's where we present a couple things. One is what I call audience transformation,
Okay.
and this is probably cobbled together from a bunch of different people. Um, I, I don't think it's like one guy's book or whatever, but we use this framework of do, think, know, feel.
Okay. Do
Um,
no feel.
do,
Okay.
think, know, feel, because ultimately we want the audience to do something. To do
Mhm.
something, they have to have thoughts. They have to think a thought. To have that thought, they probably have to know something, some kind of fact, some kind of like input. And before they're willing to pay attention to any of that stuff, they have to feel something.
Mhm.
And so it sort of goes in that it's sort of an inverse order of importance, but then we flip it when we start doing development, right? Ultimately, we're trying to get
Gotcha.
them to do something, but when we're doing creative development, we have to start with how do we make them feel something.
Gotcha.
Um, and so we document that for our clients. We start
Mhm.
with what do we want them to do? And then we walk backwards to how do we want to make them feel so
Okay.
that eventually through that process, they do the thing, whether that's click the link, sign up for the newsletter, whatever.
And this is the treatments for you guys is normally presented like on a deck, or is it like
Yeah.
a? Okay. Cool.
Yep, a deck. Yep,
Interesting. Okay.
yep. I'll do a
Very
little
cool.
walkthrough video like I'm in the room, a little
Yeah.
Don Draper style, but no one wants to do that anymore. So it's part of a PDF click this thing, you know.
Cool. I
Um,
like it, man. I like it.
yeah, it's helpful. With that though, we want to present the concept, right? Because we haven't even gotten to the creative yet. That's still
Right.
just part of audience transformation strategy. And so then we want to step into like, what is the concept?
Right.
And that's where I start borrowing a little bit more from Robert McKee and others like screenwriting techniques. That's where we
Mm-hmm.
start talking about like, what's the controlling idea? What's the central dramatic question? What's the like central thesis to the
Mm.
spot?
Using these
Um,
big video words, man. Big video
I
words.
do. Because
Down for us.
you
Break it.
know, higher ed background. I don't know. It got beat into me enough that it's like,
No, you're good. Just a quick one-liner for each one of those. Just
yeah,
trying to keep. I'm trying to keep up with you as well. Just an
yeah.
FYI.
No, it's totally fine. Yeah. So the controlling idea is like a concept. What is in just a couple words? What are we trying to do here? Um, sometimes like a that's what we build it off of, and that's more like a conceptual build.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we build it around a dramatic question. So you know, every chick flick in the world is will they, won't they? Sometimes clients will let us get away with that as well, right? Not
Gotcha.
will they, won't they, but what we did a project for a technology integrator is what they're called. They help warehouses build, install, and maintain the technological infrastructure for order fulfillment.
Okay.
And
Okay.
they let us do a story that was a little bit more about the dramatic question, which was like, how's this going to end up? We came in and started recording this, you know, started capturing the story midway through the project. Things were going badly. The relationship between our client and their client was not so great.
Hmm.
And so establishing that conflict early on meant that in the audience's mind, there is a little bit of like, this is brave for advertising.
Yeah.
How's this going to end up? How is
Yeah.
this going to end up glorifying the client, right? Because we all know it's going to end there. So how is it going to get there?
Yeah.
Um, you know, same thing with like Marvel movies, right? We all know the good guys are going to end, but the central dramatic question is a little bit like, but how?
Right.
Um, and then the last one that sometimes I'll deploy to is just like, what's the central thesis? What are we trying to prove? Um, right now, I'd say the documentary that I'm finishing up this week, which is out now somewhere.
Nice.
You people
Plug.
that are listening,
Feel
by the
free to
time you're
plug.
listening to this, it'll be out.
Feel free to
Um,
plug.
but it's built a little bit more on that central thesis. Like, what are we trying to prove? And in this film, we're trying to prove that a bicycle is more than just a way of getting around. It really is agency, it's choice, it is empowerment. And we
Right.
set that up in the first 20 seconds of the film, hoping that by the end, you've held on to see that proven out. And so
Mm.
for a client, these three things, and I use them sort of interchangeably or all together or whatever, these three things kind of they help build the rhetorical framework for the story that we're telling, right? The
Mm.
messaging framework that then we can use our cinematic tools to do those to affect that change, to tell that
Right.
story,
Right.
to move that message a little bit.
Right.
And that's where we start asking questions about story structure. And this is where I use like the muse pillars, the science of storytelling pillars. I use that quite a bit in this phase,
Mm-hmm.
just because they're simple and they're widely applicable to content of a variety of sizes. And so that's people, place, purpose, and plot. Um, and that's just, again, it's just been a really helpful framework. Even in a 30-second video, you still have a character, you still have a message, you still put it somewhere, right? There's a place, there's some kind of like tangibleness to it. And there's still a plot. There's still things like beginning, middle, and end, right?
Yeah.
Things move and change.
Yeah.
And so by identifying those four pillars, that helps us even like build the story even more tightly.
Gotcha.
And even then now we can ask the deeper, you know, the even more deep questions about like, okay, now who's our character? What do they want? What's in their way? What's at stake? What's the conflict?
Gotcha.
You know, those kinds of things. So it really is, I find it helpful. And this is the big thing when you sent me some prompts that I felt like I could share is like, it's so easy to get lost when you're storytelling, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote,
Mm-hmm.
that having a framework can be so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I sometimes even forget to use my own frameworks
Mm.
because I'm like, oh, I just need to meet the client. I got to help them do the
Yeah.
thing. And then, oh, I don't know. What ideas do I have? How do I do this? But then I'm like,
And
okay, start from the beginning. Start at the beginning, force myself to step through this step by step, and by the end, I have a really clear picture of what
Yeah,
we're trying to accomplish. Um,
absolutely,
so
man.
yeah,
Got it. Well, let me vomit this back to you and
Blech.
see if this is making sense. And
Yeah.
for the people that are listening, take notes. Um,
Good luck,
and
everybody. I hope
make
this
this.
is helpful, everyone. I don't know.
Yeah, make
Email me. We can talk more.
your own.
You said you
So
wanted to talk about storytelling. Oh, here's how I do it. Blech.
I love it. I love it. So initially, we're talking about the early discovery
Yep.
process, identifying the audience,
Yep.
outcome, and the distribution possibilities for that business that they're wanting to kind of put
Yep.
the content on. Um, the creative treatment, where we're kind of identifying the audience transformation, do,
Yep.
think, know, feel. Starting off with do, going to feel. So in order
Yep.
to do something, I need to think something, or to think something, you kind
Yep.
of have to know something, and so and so. So in order to
Yep.
know
Yep. Yep.
something, you have to kind of feel something. And I think that's a great process of thinking. And I can see why you would flip that when you're kind
Mm-hmm.
of conceptualizing
Because
the
really, what
problem.
we're asking is, how do we then start that feeling up?
Right. Exactly.
Later
Exactly.
on, we can figure out how to put in whatever data, info, whatever.
Right.
Oftentimes, that's the kludgy stuff at the end. It's the call to action.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
but that feeling, ultimately, people only do things because they feel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's it.
And I mean, I'm still going through it, but just breaking even that creative treatment side of it. If you're starting with feel, uh, when you're at that point, now you think
Mm-hmm.
about, okay, how do I invoke the
That's right.
feeling that we want them to
That's right.
feel in a scene where I'm not saying, "Oh, I woke up and my back hurts and I don't know what I should do. Man, this feels not good." Like, how do we invoke the emotion without them saying all that,
That's right.
and it actually prescribes the
Right.
story? I
And
think
as
that's
we're
great.
asking that question, like your process, I'm kind of similar. Like you say, how do I make people feel? Well, music,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like, okay, let's
Exactly.
like jump on Artlist and find some reference tracks. Like,
Exactly.
that's huge. Like, you can
Yep.
already at that stage start thinking about the tools that you will deploy, cinematic
Absolutely.
tools, right? Music, shot, color, design,
Absolutely.
these
Yep.
things.
Absolutely. So that's great. And then going to the concept part of it, and
Yeah,
the controlling idea. What are we trying to do here? Will they? Won't they? I think that's funny when you said that's chick flick.
yeah.
Because when you said that, I was like, that's exactly what it is. It's
The whole
just,
thing is like,
will they? Won't they fall
But
back in love?
that's right. Is it going to happen? Oh man, I don't know. He doesn't know that this was a bet. She doesn't know. Yeah,
She lost her memory. He didn't.
yeah,
Will
that's right.
Will they get back in love, or will she hate him?
Yeah,
I am quoting a movie with Channing Tatum and Rachel McAdams that just came to mind.
no judgment
It's
here. My go-to is to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
you know,
Cinematic
um,
masterpiece.
exactly. But how? I think that's
Yeah,
the other one you're mentioning.
yeah,
And then what are we trying to prove? The example you shared with your documentary with the bike is a better way to get around. It's not just what do you say? A bike
it's
is
not
a
just a
better way
bike.
to
It's
get
not just a way
around.
to get around. It is a way of giving someone agency, control,
Absolutely.
choice. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. And then just the story structure here, people, purpose,
yeah, all
plot,
that stuff. That's more
figuring
classic,
that
right?
stuff out.
But
Yeah.
uh, I just come
That's
back to
great.
like jumping straight into that stuff. You just don't know sometimes,
Yeah,
right? You
that's
just don't
true.
know. And so, and especially when we're talking about, what do you say? I'll say commercial filmmaking, by which I mean corporate, commercial, whatever, things for clients.
Right. Right.
Um, you know, we have to ground everything in the outcome.
Right.
And, otherwise we're just being frou-frou. So by starting all the way back at the outcome, we can create characters that are really going to be meaningful, hopefully, for that outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think being able to, like you're saying, it can be overwhelming. And I think an encouragement that I would, if anyone is listening, hopefully somebody's listening to this, but the encouragement is be able to take a piece of this at a time and fully like invest your mental capacity into each section.
That's
Because
right.
part of me is like, man, I'm kind of curious what happens if I try to focus on a project and practice each section like with intent. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not trying to save the entire world in a day. I just want to start with, okay,
Yep.
how do I build the early discovery into my process? How
Yeah.
do I take what's been shared? And I hear all that, but I need to bring that into something that I'm creating myself,
That's
where
right.
I'm not like talking and presenting for 3 hours, and I'm not like trying to reinvent the wheel, but I want to make sure that I'm actually serving my client well. Like, what does
Yeah.
that look like? And I think that can, like we're saying, easily translate into, after creating that, all right, how do we create some kind of content that is to the point? It hits you in the feels, it has a call to
Mm,
action, and we're actually able to kind of systemize something here. It's definitely possible,
yeah.
regardless if it's a flagship video or if it's a quick TikTok. Like, it's
That's right.
definitely possible. So I think this is a solid foundation for sure.
And that's my encouragement to people is like storytelling. It's easy, even still, to be like structure is just copying stories or whatever, right? Like just makes
Yeah.
samey stuff. And I just don't think that's true, right? Like having a
Mm,
framework allows us, especially in a commercial environment, to channel our creativity in ways that are useful for the marketplace. And
yeah.
having that framework means you're not going to just get lost in the morass of all the infinity ideas that are out there. You
Yeah.
really start narrowing it so that you can be creative with what is left. Um,
Absolutely.
and so that's what my big encouragement to people is like, think about your approach. Having a standard storytelling approach is going to not only make you less crazy inside of a project, it's going to increase your regularity of delivery, right? It's going to raise the floor, might shrink the ceiling a little bit, maybe, but like
Yeah.
that professionalism is about consistency and
Right.
having a framework created by you that you believe in, that you have developed yourself or whatever, at least allows you to create that consistently good body of work that serves clients and gets you more work afterwards.
Yep. And that's what changes it from a hobby to a business.
Mm,
If anyone's wondering.
that's good.
Sorry if I hurt some feelings there, but that's,
That's good.
that's kind of part of it. It has to be systemized. It has to be
Yeah,
something that's repeatable, um, and becomes more and more repeatable as you grow and scale,
that's right.
because you're going to be serving more people. So absolutely
Yeah.
great stuff, man. What's your encouragement to any videographer starting to get into it and trying to get better at their craft and storytelling? How do you encourage somebody with this kind of stuff in this
Do
world?
reps, just like you said with like weddings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do reps. Try to do as much as you possibly can
Yeah,
while you're sort of developing your voice and your framework. And then yeah, like build a little storytelling framework for yourself. Choose one. Go save the cat. Go whatever, right? Like pick your favorite guru and do that for a while, and do your best to apply it to the work that you do, whether that's for a client or for yourself, um, so that you can develop that sort of like professional consistency um, in what you do. Yeah, I think that would
absolutely.
be my big encouragement to folks.
I agree. I got nothing to add to that. I'd say the same exact thing, man. Put some reps in, get that muscle memory going, break the muscle memory, adjust it, refine it, keep pushing forward. Seek some wise counsel,
Mm.
like some people that's in a safety zone. Say, hey man, what do you think about this? Hit up Kemp. Say, hey, I made this cat saving video, like you said. What do you think? He'll have
Oh
like
man,
30
Blake
cat videos.
Snyder. Don't
But
read him.
yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Sweet. Thank you so much for taking the time, Kemp. Like, this is really, I mean, for myself, like, this is very informative, very helpful. Um, I enjoy it, man. I see things that I can definitely think about myself. And I'll say, even for our storytelling process, a lot of it does fall. There's some similarities on here. There's
Mm-hmm.
some details that I've never even heard about. But when it comes to being able to kind of start with what we want people to do and going to what we want them to feel, that's like in the transformational piece of the meetings we have with our clients as well. So I love that there's
Yeah.
some little bit of a
Yep. That's right.
sim-
And like none of this is none of us are reinventing the wheel here.
yeah,
It's just
exactly.
the wheel that we're all dressing up in different language or whatever,
Yep.
right? Like that's all it
Yep.
is. Because story is this universal human thing. But anyway, I'm not going to give it a soapbox. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're
It
good.
has been
Yeah.
an honor, and
Yeah.
hopefully, yeah. I mean, if people want to reach out or whatever, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn these days, or
Mhm.
you can find me other ways. I'm sure. Happy to talk shop with anybody at any time.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time, Kemp. Thank you guys for listening. Until next time, you guys have a great one. We'll talk soon. Thanks.